I won't grow up, I won't grow up, I will kill you in your sleep, I will kill you in your sleep, I won't leave forensic evidence, I won't leave forensic evidence, and you will not make a peep, and you will not make a peep. Today we're talking about whether Peter Pan is evil or not. Welcome to Teacup for One. My name is Matt, and I have 2 degrees. And is Peter Pan supposed to be evil? Okay, a few days ago, there was this article posted on Inside the Magic. I'm going to read you the headline right now. Peter Pan was actually supposed to be a serial killer all along. Now, granted, it is an interesting article, it makes some interesting points, but I just think the headline is doing what Inside the Magic does best. It's oversimplifying and sensationalizing at the same time, but you really can't blame them, because this is something that happens a lot when it comes to people interpreting Peter Pan. JM Barrie's original play and original novel are pieces that are open to a lot of broad interpretation that I don't think is neither right or wrong, but a lot of people will latch onto one interpretation and just decide this is it. This is the fact. And it's kind of perfect because this is the video I was planning to make for this week anyway, and now Inside the Magic has just fueled the fire. So let's talk about it. In JM Barrie's original novel/play, is Peter Pan portrayed as being evil, or is that a misinterpretation that internet hipsters are just flooding the internet with for clout? I'm gonna say a little bit of both. There are 2 major interpretations of the character of Peter Pan. One is that he is completely innocent and that any of his mischievous qualities are just a byproduct of him being an eternal child. But then the other interpretation is that he is actually fully evil and that this guy has a level of understanding beyond what he's actually showing us. And I think there's an argument to be made for both interpretations. But if you want to land on a definitive answer, I think you, the person reading, watching, or interpreting Peter Pan, need to ask yourself, how aware do I think Peter actually is? See, therein lies like his evilness level, in my opinion. It actually reminds me of something that I learned when I was studying clown. Yes, I studied clown. I have 2 degrees. It reminds me of something that I learned while I was studying clown, which was this idea that a character either exists in a state of innocence or in a state of experience. And I think both of those are pretty self-explanatory, but it's kind of like a mirror to somebody existing in a state of childhood or adulthood. If you're in a state of innocence, then you just have this like blissful ignorance to the world and this purity that comes with that. But if you're in a state of experience, you're somebody who's moved away from innocence based on like things that have happened to you in your life that have caused you to grow, change, and learn. So yeah, innocence versus experience. And that dichotomy to me is fascinating when you apply it to Peter Pan, the story, because it perfectly describes Peter Pan, the character. Now, I think this is the moment in the video where I remind you that Peter Pan's first appearance was not in the play titled Peter Pan. Peter Pan as a character was first introduced in a novel by JM Barrie called The Little White Bird. The Little White Bird is like, okay, I didn't actually read it, but I read the Wikipedia article. So, based on my labor-intensive Wikipedia research, The Little White Bird is framed kind of like The Princess Bride, where you have this adult telling a series of stories to a child. One of those stories is all about Peter Pan. Now, eventually, with the success and popularity, I'm assuming, of the character, the Peter Pan-specific chapters were isolated and published on their own as something called Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens. Now, if you are a Pan fan, the plot of Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens is going to sound very familiar because it is Peter Pan's origin story. It's the origin story that he outright tells Wendy in Peter Pan. We even get a little bit of it in Hook. The basics of it are this. Peter, as a literal infant, decides that he does not want to grow up, so then he runs away. He flies away to Kensington Garden with the birds and the fairies, and he hangs out with them there for a little bit, but then eventually he misses his mother, so he goes back. But when he returns, he notices another little boy in his bed and realizes that he has been replaced. Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens is interesting because I think it's the one point where we actually get to see Peter existing in a state of true innocence. Now, the entire concept behind Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens is that humans all start off as birds, and that is why Peter is able to fly. It's because when he runs away, I'm assuming, that kind of disrupts the process from like bird turning into human. So he exists halfway between bird and human baby. And there's this beautiful line that says something to the effect of, "The moment you doubt whether or not you can fly, you automatically cease to be able to do it forever. And that is exactly what happens. When Peter realizes that he's not a bird, that he's a human baby, he automatically loses his ability to fly, thus trapping him in Kensington Gardens. Now, eventually the fairies help him out to get him back home to his mom, but by that point it's too late, and that's when there's another baby in his bed. So at this point, Peter has already moved out of a state of innocence because he has experienced loss. Twofold, actually, because he's lost his ability to fly, and he's also lost the love of his mother. And this sets the stage for the character that we get in Peter Pan. Now, there were definitely some revisions to his backstory in between Peter Pan at Kensington Gardens and Peter Pan the play, but I believe the implication here is that based on that tragic backstory, Peter is in a place where he is constantly trying to regain that innocence that he lost. And he's doing it superficially. So because he can't fly on his own anymore, he depends on the help of the fairies and the fairy dust. Because he no longer has a mother, he kind of kidnaps one for himself. And it's not just that he's trying to recreate the innocent days of when he was an infant, it's like he is actively slamming the brakes on having any more life experiences that could either cause him pain or force him to grow up any more than he already has. And that just begs the question, even though his body isn't growing up, does that mean his mind isn't developing anymore? And the beauty of it is that we really don't know. I mean, we know that he does still have the long-term memories of that traumatic experience with his mother replacing him with another baby. But if we're going by JM Barrie's original novel, we also learn that Peter doesn't really retain any other memories. Like, he has no short-term memory. In the chapter dedicated to the flight to Neverland, because yes, the flight gets an entire chapter and it is amazing. But anyway, in the chapter dedicated to the flight to Neverland, it's established that Peter, he has the memory of a goldfish. The darlings have to continuously remind them who they are because he'll just fly away from them for a second, then see them and think, oh, I don't know you. And they even allude to this a little bit in the 2003 film.
Who are you?
I'm John.
John.
And establishing this is crucial because it gives us some insight into how Peter's mind works and how he stays in a perpetual state of childhood. Because just think about it. If he can't remember past any given moment, then he can't retain lessons. If he can't retain lessons, it means he can't grow up. So you would think that means that Peter is just a blank slate. He's somebody that can't learn from his mistakes, which accounts for why he is so aggressively childish. But don't forget, we know for a fact that Peter has that long-term memory of the pain of discovering that his mother had replaced him with another child. And to me, that is one of his big motivators behind why he wants, nay, needs, to remain a child for all time. But then it makes you think, how far is Peter willing to go to maintain this perpetual state of childhood? Would he kill for it? There are some people that say definitively, yes, Peter Pan is a serial killer who kidnaps kids and then kills them when they start to grow up. And I don't know. There is evidence to support this in the book. First, Peter does claim, not even claim, Peter brags to John about how he has killed loads of pirates. So, if you want to believe Peter has blood on his hands, he says he does. Is he telling the truth? I don't know. You can either accept this as fact, or you can accept it as a kid who is over-exaggerating. But really, the messed up beauty of Neverland is that it is a place where a child's biggest fantasies come to life. Who knows, maybe Peter's fantasy is to kill a pirate, which means he's actually done it. Maybe he's actually killed tons of pirates. Because make-believe isn't really a thing in Neverland, but it's also the only thing in Neverland. But those are just pirates, they don't count, right? I mean, that's a conversation for another day. But we also have this one line, this one single sentence from the Peter Pan novel, which is what people have latched onto as proof that Peter has killed multiple lost boys. Ahem. The boys on the island vary, of course, in numbers, according as they get killed and so on, and when they seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out. Peter thins them out. I mean, thins them out. That could mean a lot of things. It could mean that he banishes them, or it could also mean cold-blooded murder. Maybe that's your happy thought, and if it is, you can go with that interpretation. But I think the thing that a lot of people miss when they're, considering JM Barrie's work is that he sort of writes in the voice of an unreliable narrator. So just because it's stated doesn't mean it's fact. It's almost like when you're telling a story to a kid and then just to make things more exciting, you're going to over-embellish things a little bit. Not to mention the fact that JM Barrie seemed to have this very dry, sarcastic wit to him. So when I'm reading that sentence, I'm getting the vibe that he's saying, there's tons of lost boys on the island, I don't know, maybe there's 12, maybe there's 20, the numbers change, sometimes Peter kills them. Anyway, moving on. And then you as the reader are just meant to have that moment of, wait a second, was that a joke? I don't know if that was a joke. I think you're joking. Are you joking? Now, do I, Matt, personally believe that Peter is actually a cold-blooded killer and a murderer? Now, I think the jury is still out when it comes to pirates, but when it comes to killing off the lost boys when they decide that they want to grow up, or when they start to grow up, I'm leaning towards no. Mostly because, in the story, we fully see what happens when Peter is confronted by lost boys wanting to grow up. When Wendy announces that she's going home and taking the lost boys with her, yes, Peter is heartbroken, Peter throws a tantrum, but you know what Peter doesn't do? He doesn't kill them. In fact, he even offers to help them. He arranges a ferry guide to take them home. But one thing that I found fascinating about the novel is the description of what Peter goes through after learning that all of his friends are leaving him to grow up. I'm going to read it to you. But of course he cared. Very much. And he was so full of wrath against grown-ups, who, as usual, were spoiling everything, that as soon as he got inside his tree, he breathed intentionally quick, short breaths at the rate of about 5 to a second. He did this because there is a saying in the Neverland that every time you breathe, a grown-up dies. And Peter was killing them off vindictively as fast as possible. And I think this is the most actively violent that Peter gets. He's not physically killing anyone, but he's just leaning into the belief that he's killing someone. The anger is there, the intention is there, but at the end of the day, it is just make-believe. Or is it? Because remember, we also know for a fact that if anyone says there's no such thing as fairies, that... Whew. A fairy drops down dead. So maybe by Neverland rules, the same applies to grown-ups. And breathing. I don't know. And not knowing is the key. I don't think we're supposed to have any clear picture of what exactly is going on in Peter's mind. If you look at Peter's actions, specifically and most importantly, taking Wendy and her brothers to Neverland. If we accept that he is in a state of purity and a state of innocence, then he's just a kid who wants an adventure and wants to have fun for the rest of his days. But if we choose to believe that he has a little bit more of a mature knowledge that he's leading on to, that's when the story takes on a bit of a creepier, kidnappy, murderous edge. So the whole is Peter Pan evil question really, in my mind, has nothing to do with what he's doing. It has everything to do with why he's doing it. And I think that's at the root of why some portrayals of Peter Pan come off as infinitely creepier than others. And really, I think the one consistent factor with every evil Peter Pan interpretation comes down to one consistent thing. The implication that he has knowledge beyond his years and that he has motives beyond what he's actually showing. I actually think that's why Disney's Peter Pan comes off as so unsettling, because he was voiced by a male teenager, Bobby Driscoll, who at the time of recording his dialogue was probably somewhere between the ages of 13 to 15. So just having a slightly deeper male voice inhabiting the character automatically, consciously or not, informs how we interpret his actions. And this was also the root of the character as he was portrayed in Once Upon a Time. Now, in OAT, we see the ultimate evil Peter Pan, and it's established in his backstory. Oh, spoiler warning. It's established in his backstory that he was a grown man who sold his soul to the shadow thing in Neverland to stay young and to live forever. And in that moment, he physically changes from an adult to a young boy, but he retains his memories and his experiences and effectively becomes the embodiment of every evil Peter Pan. A grown man in a child's body, faking innocence with an ulterior motive. And those are just two examples, but this interpretation of evil Peter is an interpretation that I definitely think works and serves the story, but I don't think it's the only valid interpretation. Because again, the messed up beauty of Neverland and of this story is that incredibly blurred line between what's real and what's make-believe. But what I find unintentionally fascinating is how closely this Is Peter Pan evil debate mirrors the very real debate that historians have had about JM Barrie, Peter Pan's creator, for decades. Like, JM Barrie is one of the most fascinating writers, I would say, in all of history, because, like Peter Pan, we know what he did, but we don't know why he did it. Yes, on the one hand, there is this persona that J.M. Barrie was this perfectly innocent storyteller who befriended the Llewellyn Davis family and became a surrogate father and eventual guardian to the boys that inspired Peter Pan, which, is basically the Finding Neverland story. But on the other hand, there are historians who claim that J.M. Barrie wasn't that innocent, that he was in fact a stalker, a master manipulator, that Sylvia Llewellyn Davis never intended for him to become the guardian of her kids, and that he actually went in and changed her will to ensure that he would get custody of them. I mean, to get into all of that would merit an entirely separate video. If that's a video you want to watch, let me know, and I will do it. But what I just find so interesting about it is that when it comes to J.M. Barrie, we get the exact same thing that we get with Peter Pan. It really gives a brand new perspective to that point in Finding Neverland when little Peter says, "I'm not Peter Pan. He is." Anyway, so much more to discuss, but that's all the time we have today, friends, because this concludes yet another episode of Teacup 4-1. So let me know in the comment section down below, where do you weigh in on this entire discussion? Do you think Peter is innocent, or do you think he has a little bit of an evil edge? Also, let me know if you'd like me to do a video going a bit deeper into the history surrounding J.M. Barrie, because I personally find it fascinating. And if you do too, I'll do a video. But until then, friends, if you want to be the first to know when I release more videos about Disney, Shakespeare, cats, sometimes Funko Pops, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already. And if you haven't subscribed already, it is so easy. All you have to do is click on my face. Thanks for joining me again today, everyone. My name is Matt, and I have 2 degrees, and that's the Teacup for 1. Go away.